I measure the success because inherently in the mission of what we're doing in this team, we are looking at ways to address social and economic development through technology. And we do that on the premise that those are the needs in these markets, and that's the best way to build business for HP as well, right? So I see it as, a positive circular connection. And to the degree that we are actually selling product and making money, and if we truly believe that we have created solutions that have a positive impact on these markets inherently, then I think that's a positive measure for HP, and it's a positive measure for the markets that we serve. So where the 441 is concerned, for instance, we're putting more computers in classrooms in developing economies because on a per seat basis, the 441 costs 30% less than the local white box. 30% less than any other computer you can buy that's just a regular one-to-one computer. So when you look at education systems that work on a fixed budget, they're getting more computers in front of their students, and they're doing it with the high quality of HP technology, which is something very different from what you get when you buy a white box. You get the support that comes along with it with HP, so you get a very positive experience, not to mention the fact that because it's open source, we've been able to load it with great education software packages, 70 different software packages on the 441. So it's got a great positive impact on the quality of education, on the efficiency of administration in these schools. And so just inherently from the way it's been designed, we believe it has a positive impact. It's one of the great things about HP, the fact that we have global presence and we have partnerships all over the world. So for instance, in South Africa, we have a system of reseller relationships that span the entire country, even in the most rural areas, like in northern South Africa and the Limpopo region, which is where we have our iCommunity. We have a reach through our partners to provide support. So that was a criterion for what we developed in the 441. It's not just the technology, but it's the whole solution that we're offering to make sure that it really has a positive impact. The 441, before we made it commercially available, for instance, was deployed throughout the iCommunity and used in a variety of settings, from tribal authority centers to healthcare centers to classrooms. So we actually had it out there, it was in use, and we were collecting data on how it was being used and what the benefits were and what the downfalls were. And we refined the solution, all the solution, not just the technology, but how it was being offered and the way we supported it to make it optimal for these kinds of environments. But on top of that, our partners are innovating on our innovation. So we had one partner in South Africa who had been planning to create some sort of a weatherized way of making computers available in kind of a common space, an outdoor common space. They saw the 441 and they said, SCORE, this is a great way for us to provide 4 user outlets with the same amount of space and the same amount of work. So we affectionately call it the 441 tank, but it's a steel encased 441 that's kind of almost like a kiosk or on a podium, sort of with 4 different user stations around it, and it's with minimal shelter, and it requires absolutely no monitoring on the part of the partner, but they've put it out there and made it available in different places. They happen to be located in the iCommunity as well, in the iCommunity area, so it's available in different places throughout the iCommunity, and so their innovations have certainly added to our abilities, and this happens to be a nonprofit organization that has said to us, this is meeting our needs, and if you want to take this IP and use it to market in other places, HP, you go right ahead. So through that partnership, we're expanding the value of the solution, and all of that through local inputs. And I sat with the Ministry of Education for the Limpopo province of South Africa and discussed with them what their needs were. We showed them the 441. We went through it, and so we talked about it not just from a student perspective or a teacher perspective, but from the administrative perspective as well. The staff of the iCommunities are all locals, and they're either contractors or they're HP employees, but they're all locals to that particular area, and these are very rural areas. We also have staff for the iCommunities in our offices in the more metropolitan areas as well. But they are locals contributing culturally and technologically and socially in many different ways to the way that we're innovating. And what's happening in the iCommunities is that these are customized solutions for the needs of that community. And we have that going on in both places, and they're manifesting themselves very differently. It's really interesting to watch the differences between what's happening in India and what's happening in South Africa. But through that process, we're we're identifying nuggets that can be embodied in scalable solutions like the 441 that can be sold, or like the microfinance solution, right? We're learning about how that works in Uganda, out in the field, and figuring out how we can scale that to other areas.
Quantitative-wise, we do extensive modeling. It's sort of each project is its own business. So when you do a business plan for any business, it's the same thing for a project finance. You start with how much is it going to cost to build this power project. I always use power project. That's the easiest to conceptualize. Actually, let's use water. Water is actually good to use. How much will it cost to build it? And then how much will I need to charge over the next 20 years, let's say, to cover the cost of the capital cost and the operating cost going forward. So I have to compare that to what the community is paying now. And there's just, you have to compare like how much more do they have to pay. And then you have to be creative in how you charge. You can do tiers too. You know, you have residential, then you have companies. And how much more do you charge the companies? And what happens is you also have to think of how much leakage there is. How many companies will say they're a resident or tap into the neighbor who's a resident? So things like that you do have to compare. And when we put our proposal, we'll look at what our return is. And on a water treatment plant, it's pretty low. It might be 8%. You know, that's not a lot that you're making. So of course, Bechtel would probably look at the construction part, or you usually team with a local partner who would probably take the operator role. So there's always a win-win situation for everyone. We did this actually in Manila. They privatized 2 water systems, and that's how we did it. We had to bid the price, compare it to the current tariffs going on, and what it would bring to the community. And we had to also compare not just the price, but how much leakage we could fix too, to prove to the government, we're not just going to go in and try to take all this revenue from you. We're going to fix the pipes, we're going to clean the water, and see what we can do. In terms of pricing what we provide to the community, that's hard, because at the end of the day, you are charging them a little more. You're giving them more water. But what we do with that is more in public relations to educate the community. You might be paying a little more. You're going to get clean water. You're going to get reliable water all the time, 24 hours a day. I mean, I was there working, and it's amazing. Metro Manila is the center of the Philippines, and there'd be blackouts. You know, just in the middle of the day you're working. This doesn't make sense. I mean, businesses have to go on, but then the power goes off. And same with water. You know, you don't want in the countryside, babies not being able to get clean water or people tapping into it. And your question on sustainable development, I mean, yes, sometimes we worry about all talk, but we work with the local government and the community. We don't go in and say, oh, we think you need a new rail system. I want on one of their oldest rail systems, and there are shanties up against it. And every month, at least a dog died because it was so close. And we thought, this is ridiculous. They need a new rail system. There needs to be so much barrier between the houses and the rail. But everything we could do, we could not convince the people they should move, because they're in Metro Manila. This is like, being in San Francisco and moving them out to Concord or something. And they just wouldn't move. And we thought, it's for the community, it'd be best to build a new system, but they're not going to be convinced. So for the community, it's best to leave what's there and not disrupt things. I've actually worked on a couple of projects in Mexico, a water treatment project. It didn't go through because our local partners pulled out. We actually built one of the first privately foreign-owned power plants, Samaluca. So we definitely look at Latin America, and we have a team in Mexico City, in fact. So definitely it's on our radar screen. So
Mexico's actually top on our list for instance, expanding the 441 geographically. That said, if you were to take a list of all the countries in the world in order of development, and you were to take that line that divides the developed world and the developing world, and you were to move it down one, Mexico would be in the developed world. And so I'm just speculating here, but I bet there's a little less sex appeal for people to be dealing with Mexico because it's not as poor as some of these other countries. I'm not saying that's HP's stance at all, but just in terms of it doesn't get talked about, you're right, it doesn't get talked about. It's not at the top of the list when people talk about India and China and Brazil, and I think it might be partly because of the proximity. It's not as exotic, and because it is more developed than these other countries. That's just my own personal, not an HP statement. That's just my own personal observation.
I think a huge number of the barriers are either directly or indirectly from the government. I think that when you have, I'm quoting the orthodoxy of the World Bank, but it's absolutely, I would agree with it. When you have a genuinely uncorrupt government, which allows a lot of free trade, both within the economy and outside, right, a lot of good things will happen. If you, in that environment, then bring in lots of skills, like lending, training, education, trade, things will happen fine. Right? And if you look at the examples of countries around the world where governments have done that right, whether it's Singapore, whether it's Botswana, for that matter, whether it was the US 120 years ago, things will work out. Right? And equally in the other direction, if you have a very corrupt government, courts that don't work, then it doesn't take long to destroy a prosperous country. I mean, how many people here have visited Zimbabwe? Okay. How many people here have visited Singapore? Anybody have visited both? Okay. Would you have believed that 40 years ago, Zimbabwe was richer than Singapore per capita? No. All right. And at the time, if you read the contemporary literature, everybody believed that, then was Rhodesia, but had this great promising future. And people had 101 reasons why Singapore was permanently going to be a poor state. Right? Cultural reasons, geographic, political. They were wrong. Now, the reason is that Singapore's fundamentally had a very non-corrupt government that's promoted trade for 40 years, and Zimbabwe's managed to have a very impressive series of bad governments for a period of time. So I think, to your point, the government makes a huge difference. And therefore you can have what you can do if the government is corrupt, I think is very difficult. There are some people that have the point of view that say you stand off. I don't go that far. I think if you are an American corporation, you have to be extremely careful about what you do, and that means that sometimes you have to stand away. But I do think in a lot of situations, as long as you're scrupulously honest to yourself and to people around you, and you're absolutely confident that if ever anybody tells the world what you have done, that you feel proud of that, you can make a lot of differences, either by buying stuff from people, training people, giving people a chance to travel. And there are lots of good examples of that. But I do think you've got to be relatively careful in the situation, and also that the government make a huge difference in making things work well. I would say just go out there and do it. I think it's a number of things, practical things to do. One is actually get a job that takes you there, whether it's working for a company that does it. There's no substitute for going there, right? Just go out there and do something, whether it's buying stuff, developing products, learning stuff, even if it's just personal travel, just physically get there. Work for a company that's doing business in that area. I mean, if you actually want to do direct development, then companies like DAI and whatever will do that. So I would say just get out there and do it. And learn by doing. You can make a huge difference, I think, by whether it's investing or buying or helping people do stuff. I mean, all this stuff does actually add up. I think I would just encourage you to give it a go, and you can make a difference.
Yeah, I would agree. You have all the skills you need to go there. I mean, I actually never did international work. I worked in the Silicon Valley. I grew up in Southern California and Canada. So I strategically chose a company that had international offices, and that during the interview process said, "Are you open to relocation?" And of course I said yes, and sure enough, within a year I moved. So if you don't have international experience, I think that is pretty key now, especially because so many people do, that if you can get into a company that offers a relocation or sends you straight to the field, that's what you want to do. But in terms of getting more experience, going to a company that teaches you XYZ skills, I think it's just go to the company you want to work for and just start doing it now.
I think as a person who is hiring individuals to come and do this work on a relatively regular basis, the first thing I look for is extended field experience. People who've worked abroad, not necessarily in the countries where we're doing business or where we're focused right now, but I think Steve and I talked about this over the phone. It's kind of like the analogy of when you go to school, it's not just what you learn, it's that you learn how to learn. And I think when you spend time abroad in the field, you learn to be more sensitive culturally. You learn to be picking up on differences that's a skill set that you can apply to other cultures and other environments as well. And so I think that's really important. But I also think it's important to remember that, for instance, I have much more in common with a person in China, which is actually a country I've never had the opportunity to visit, who's at the top of the economic pyramid, than I do with someone who's been born and raised in the U.S. but lived at the bottom of the economic pyramid. So when you think about going into the field and you want to learn about development, it's not about going and hanging out with the people at the top of the pyramid in that country, because that's a totally different experience than putting yourself in a situation where you're actually dealing with people that are further down in the pyramid.
One gift I think that you have as business people, we have as business people, is that there's a language of understanding how business works that really is cross-cultural, right? And that if you when you travel to different strange places and exotic lands and all that kind of stuff, you talk to other business people, whether it's the person selling by the side of the road, whether it's running a power plant or whatever, the fact that you can actually understand their business, or at least understand the kind of things they worry about, is a way to build a bridge, right? And I think that's one of the great things about business, is that we have a shared understanding of it. And if you can talk to somebody in a different country about why is your business succeeding and how do you service your customers and what do you worry about, I mean, you're building a bridge in a way that, I don't really understand music, so therefore I can't talk about music, but I can talk about business. And I think that it's a wonderful gift that you now have. It's a sort of a language or a thing that you're part of. And just by doing that, you can have the conversation. And I think I would suggest this one. Number one is you'd be surprised how much you can contribute, right? Because you really have learned a lot. And I'm always surprised at how much I learn. It's fun.